She was a decorated cop, a loving wife, and a devoted mom. But the moment Officer Angela Reid stepped inside her quiet suburban home, everything she thought she knew was destroyed in an instant. What she saw in her daughter's room would break any parent, and what she did next would shake the entire nation. This is the unbelievable true story of the cop who shot her own father to protect her child. Was it justice or revenge? Before we dive in, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe for more shocking true crime stories, and comment below. What would you do if you were in Angela's shoes? Let's talk about it. Officer Angela Reid's police cruiser rolled to a stop in front of her modest two-story home on Maple Street, and a gentle breeze rustled through the leaves of the old oak tree in the front yard. It was a picturesque scene, one that Angela had always associated with peace and security. Little did she know that in mere moments, her world would be shattered beyond recognition. As she stepped out of her vehicle, Angela took a deep breath, savoring the crisp autumn air. It had been a long shift, filled with the usual mix of traffic stops, domestic disputes, and paperwork. She was looking forward to a quiet evening with her family, her husband Michael, who worked nights at the local hospital, and their 15-year-old daughter Jasmine. Angela's father, Harold, had been staying with them for the past few weeks. At 68, he was still spry and full of life, always ready with a joke or a helping hand. His presence had been a blessing, especially with Michael's demanding schedule. Harold had stepped in to help with Jasmine, picking her up from school and keeping an eye on her until Angela or Michael got home. As she walked up the path to her front door, Angela felt a sudden chill run down her spine. Later, she would wonder if it had been some sort of premonition, a warning from the universe of the horror that awaited her inside. But at that moment, she shook it off, attributing it to the cool breeze and her own fatigue. Angela reached for her keys but paused as she noticed the door was slightly ajar. A frown creased her brow. It wasn't like Jasmine or her father to be so careless. She pushed the door open, calling out, "Dad!" "Jasmine? I'm home." The silence that greeted her was oppressive, broken only by the faint sound of movement coming from upstairs. Angela's police instincts kicked in, her hand instinctively moving to rest on her holstered weapon. Something wasn't right. As she climbed the stairs, her heart began to race. The sounds were coming from Jasmine's room, muffled voices, the creak of bed springs. Angela's mind raced through possibilities, each more terrifying than the last. She reached the landing, her footsteps silent on the carpeted floor. Jasmine's door was partially open, and as Angela approached, she could make out two distinct voices. One was unmistakably her daughter's, high-pitched and trembling. The other, to her horror, was her father's. "Shh. It's okay, sweetheart. This is our little secret, remember?" Angela felt the world tilt on its axis. Her vision narrowed to a pinpoint, focused solely on the sliver of space visible through the open door. With trembling fingers, she pushed it open. The scene that greeted her would be forever seared into her memory. Her father, Harold, sat on the edge of Jasmine's bed, his hand resting on her thigh. Jasmine, her sweet, innocent daughter, was frozen in place, her eyes wide with fear and confusion. In that moment, Angela Reid ceased to be a mother, a daughter, or even a police officer. She became something primal, a force of nature driven by an overwhelming need to protect her child. Her hand moved of its own accord, drawing her service weapon from its holster. "Get away from her," Angela heard herself say, her voice barely recognizable. Harold turned, his eyes widening in shock and fear. "I can explain." But there was no explanation that could justify what she had seen, no words that could erase the betrayal, the violation of trust. Angela's finger tightened on the trigger. The first shot rang out, shattering the silence of the suburban afternoon. Then another, and another. 5 times in total, the gun bucked in Angela's hand, each report like a thunderclap in the confined space of the bedroom. As the echo of the final shot faded, Angela lowered her weapon. Harold lay motionless on the floor, blood pooling beneath him. Jasmine huddled in the corner of her bed, her hands clamped over her ears, tears streaming down her face. The acrid smell of gunpowder hung in the air, mingling with the metallic scent of blood. Outside, a dog barked, and somewhere in the distance, sirens began to wail. The world had changed irrevocably, and there was no going back. Angela holstered her weapon with shaking hands. She moved to her daughter, gathering her in her arms. "It's okay, baby," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "It's over now. You're safe." As she held her trembling child, Angela's mind raced. What would happen now? How would she explain this to her superiors, to internal affairs, to Michael? But those were concerns for later. Right now, all that mattered was Jasmine. The sirens grew louder, and Angela knew she had only moments before her colleagues arrived. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for what was to come. Whatever happened next, she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She would do it all again in a heartbeat to protect her daughter. The story of Angela Reid, the cop who shot her own father to save her child, was about to become national news. But for Angela, it was just the beginning of a long and painful journey towards healing and justice. The next few hours passed in a blur for Angela. The arrival of her fellow officers, the shocked faces, the questions that seemed to come from all directions. She answered them mechanically, her police training kicking in even as her world crumbled around her. "Yes, I discharged my weapon 5 times. He was touching my daughter." Each statement felt like it was being torn from her throat, leaving it raw and aching. But through it all, Angela refused to let go of Jasmine. Her daughter clung to her, face buried in Angela's shoulder, her small body racked with silent sobs. It was Detective James Holloway who finally managed to separate them, gently explaining that Jasmine needed to be examined by a doctor and interviewed by a specialist. Angela knew the protocol. She had been on the other side of this scenario more times than she cared to remember, but knowing didn't make it any easier. "Mom, please don't leave me," Jasmine whimpered, as a kind-faced social worker tried to lead her away. Angela knelt down, cupping her daughter's face in her hands. "Listen to me, baby. I will never, ever leave you. But right now, you need to go with Ms. Taylor. She's going to take care of you while I talk to some people. I promise I'll be with you as soon as I can." As Jasmine was led away, Angela felt a part of herself go with her. She turned to face her colleagues, her friends who now looked at her with a mixture of sympathy and uncertainty. She knew what came next. "Officer Reid," Holloway said, his voice gentle but firm, "I need you to surrender your weapon and badge." Angela nodded, her movements robotic as she unclipped her holster and removed her badge. As she handed them over, she felt naked, vulnerable in a way she had never experienced before. "You know the drill, Sam," Holloway continued. "We need to process the scene, and then we'll need your full statement. Internal affairs will be involved given the nature of the incident." Angela nodded again, unable to form words. She allowed herself to be led downstairs, away from the bedroom that had become a crime scene, away from the body of her father, the man who had once been her hero and was now the source of her deepest pain and rage. As she sat in her living room, surrounded by crime scene technicians and fellow officers, Angela's mind drifted to Michael. He would be finishing his shift soon, coming home to a nightmare he couldn't have possibly imagined. She needed to call him to explain, but how could she possibly put this into words? Before she could dwell on it further, the front door burst open. Michael stood there, still in his scrubs, his face a mask of panic and confusion. "What's going on?" "I got a call. They said there was a shooting at our house." His eyes darted around the room, taking in the officers, the evidence markers. "Where's Jasmine?" Angela stood on shaky legs, crossing the room to her husband. As soon as she was within reach, Michael pulled her into a tight embrace. It was then, in the safety of his arms, that Angela finally broke down. The sobs she had been holding back came in a torrent, her body shaking with the force of her grief and shock. "Shh, it's okay," Michael murmured, stroking her hair. "Whatever it is, we'll face it together. Where's Jasmine? Is she all right?" Angela pulled back, wiping her eyes. She's with a social worker. They took her to the hospital for an exam." Michael's face paled. "An exam? Sam? What happened?" Taking a deep breath, Angela steeled herself. "It's Dad," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I caught him. He was touching Jasmine. I shot him, Michael. I killed my own father." The silence that followed was deafening. Michael's arms tightened around her, and Angela could feel him trembling. When he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "Oh my God. For a long moment, they stood there, clinging to each other in the midst of chaos. Then slowly, Michael pulled away, his hands on Angela's shoulders. "Listen to me," he said, his voice low and intense. "You did what you had to do to protect our daughter. Whatever happens next, we'll face it together, okay?" Angela nodded, drawing strength from her husband's unwavering support. As they turned to face the room full of investigators and fellow officers, she felt a flicker of hope. No matter how dark things seemed now, she wasn't alone. She had Michael, and together they would find a way through this nightmare. But as Detective Holloway approached, his face grim, Angela knew that their ordeal was far from over. The investigation was just beginning, and with it would come scrutiny, judgment, and a fight for justice that would test them all to their limits. Detective Holloway, to his credit, handled the investigation with sensitivity and professionalism. He brought in Detective Lisa Chow, a specialist in crimes against children, to take point on Jasmine's case. Together, they worked to piece together the events that had led to that fateful afternoon. Angela's initial statement, given in the hours following the shooting, was a blur of raw emotion and fragmented memories. Now sitting across from Holloway in an interview room at the precinct, she struggled to provide a more coherent account. "Take your time, Sam," Holloway said gently. "I know this isn't easy, but we need to understand exactly what happened." Angela nodded, taking a deep breath. "I came home early from my shift. I wasn't feeling well, thought I might be coming down with something. When I got to the house, the front door was ajar. I called out, but no one answered. Then I heard noises coming from upstairs." She paused, swallowing hard against the lump in her throat. Holloway waited patiently, his pen poised over his notepad. "I went up to investigate. The sounds were coming from Jasmine's room. I heard my father's voice. He was telling Jasmine to keep quiet, that it was their secret." Angela's voice broke, and she had to take a moment to compose herself before continuing. "When I opened the door, I saw him sitting on her bed. His hand was on her thigh, and Jasmine looked terrified. I lost it. I drew my weapon and told him to get away from her. He tried to say something, but I couldn't hear it over the roaring in my ears. I fired 5 times. Holloway nodded, making notes. "Did you give any verbal warnings before discharging your weapon?" Angela frowned, trying to remember. I think I told him to get away from her, but it's all a blur. I just remember needing to protect Jasmine." "I understand," Holloway said. "Now, have you ever suspected anything like this before? Any signs that your father might be abusing Jasmine?" The question hit Angela like a physical blow. "No," she whispered. "God, no. If I had any idea, he was my father. I trusted him with my child. How could I have been so blind?" Holloway reached across the table, patting her hand. "This isn't your fault, Sam. Predators like this are often very good at hiding their true nature, even from those closest to them." As the interview continued, Angela felt a growing sense of dread. She knew the questions that were coming, the ones that would determine whether she faced criminal charges for the shooting. "Officer Reid," Holloway said, his tone becoming more formal. "In your professional opinion, did you believe that your father posed an immediate threat to Jasmine's life or physical safety at the moment you discharged your weapon?" Angela hesitated. The truth was, Harold hadn't been armed. He hadn't been actively hurting Jasmine when Angela walked in. But the damage he had done, the trust he had violated, wasn't that a kind of violence in itself? I believed he posed a significant threat to her well-being." "Yes," Angela said carefully. "The sexual abuse of a child is a violent act, even if it doesn't leave visible injuries." Holloway nodded, making a note. "And in that moment, did you believe that discharging your weapon was the only way to protect your daughter from further harm?" Angela closed her eyes, remembering the rage and fear that had coursed through her in that moment. "Yes," she said softly. "In that moment, I couldn't see any other way to keep her safe." As the interview wound down, Holloway sat back in his chair, studying Angela with a mix of sympathy and concern. "You know this is going to be a complicated case. Internal affairs will be all over it, and the DA's office will have to make a decision about whether to press charges." Angela nodded, feeling numb. "I understand. I don't regret what I did, James. I'd do it again to protect Jasmine, but I know there are consequences. Holloway leaned forward, his voice low and intense. You're a good cop and a good mother. What happened was a tragedy, but you were acting to protect your child. We're going to do everything we can to make sure that's understood. As Angela left the interview room, she felt a strange mix of relief and apprehension. The investigation was far from over, and she knew that the hardest parts were yet to come. But for now at least, she had told her story. It was out in the open, no longer a secret festering in the dark. Walking down the hallway, Angela caught sight of her reflection in a window. The woman staring back at her looked older, more worn than she remembered. But there was a strength in her eyes, a determination that hadn't been there before. Whatever came next, she would face it head on, for Jasmine, for herself, and for every child who had ever suffered in silence. As she stepped out into the afternoon sun, Angela took a deep breath. The world seemed different now, sharper and more dangerous. But she was still standing, still fighting. And as long as she had breath in her body, she would continue to fight for justice, for healing, and for a future where no child would have to endure what Jasmine had. The investigation was just beginning, but Angela Reid was ready for the battle ahead. As news of the shooting spread, it sent shockwaves through the tight-knit community of Millbrook. The story was sensational, a respected police officer gunning down her own father to protect her daughter from sexual abuse. It was the kind of tragedy that no one wanted to believe could happen in their town. Yet it had unfolded right in their midst. For Angela and her family, the aftermath was a maelstrom of conflicting emotions and challenges. While many in the community rallied around them, offering support and understanding, others were quick to judge. Whispers and sideways glances followed Angela wherever she went. Some questioned her use of lethal force, while others wondered how she could have been blind to her father's true nature for so long. The police department was caught in a difficult position. On one hand, Angela was one of their own, a decorated officer with an impeccable record. On the other, the use of deadly force against an unarmed civilian, regardless of the circumstances, required thorough investigation and accountability. Captain Elena Santiago, Angela's direct superior, found herself walking a tightrope. In a press conference held a week after the incident, she addressed the media with carefully chosen words. The Millbrook Police Department is committed to a full and impartial investigation into the events that transpired on the afternoon of October 15th, Santiago stated, her face a mask of professional neutrality. Officer Reid has been placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of this investigation, as is standard procedure in any officer-involved shooting. She paused, her expression softening slightly. However, I want to make it clear that Officer Reid's actions were those of a mother protecting her child from harm. While we cannot comment on the specifics of an ongoing investigation, we ask the community to remember that behind the badge, our officers are human beings facing unimaginable challenges. The press conference did little to quell the public's appetite for information. Local news outlets ran constant updates on the case, rehashing the known facts and speculating on what might have led to such a tragic turn of events. For Jasmine, the aftermath of the abuse and the shooting was a nightmare from which she couldn't seem to wake. Nightmares plagued her sleep, and during her waking hours, she struggled with a mix of relief, guilt, and confusion. The grandfather she had loved and trusted was gone, killed by her mother to protect her. The complexity of her emotions was more than any 15-year-old should have to bear. Dr. Amelia Foster, a child psychologist specializing in trauma, worked closely with Jasmine in the weeks following the incident. In one particularly difficult session, Jasmine finally verbalized the guilt that had been eating away at her. "It's all my fault," she sobbed, curled up in a ball on Dr. Foster's couch. "If I had told someone sooner, maybe Mom wouldn't have had to kill Grandpa. Maybe he could have gotten help or something." Dr. Foster leaned forward, her voice gentle but firm. "Jasmine, listen to me. None of this is your fault. Your grandfather made choices, terrible, harmful choices, and those choices are his responsibility alone. You were a child who trusted and loved him, and he betrayed that trust. You have nothing to feel guilty about." As Jasmine worked through her trauma and therapy, Angela and Michael faced their own struggles. The strain on their marriage was palpable, with both feeling guilty for not having noticed the abuse sooner. Late one night, as they lay awake in bed, Michael finally gave voice to the fear that had been gnawing at him. "Sam," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, What if it wasn't just Jasmine? What if there were others?" Angela felt her blood run cold at the thought. She turned to face her husband, seeing her own pain and uncertainty reflected in his eyes. "I don't know," she admitted, "but if there were, we'll find out. We'll make sure justice is served, not just for Jasmine, but for anyone else he might have hurt." The possibility that Harold's abuse might have extended beyond Jasmine added a new dimension to the investigation. Detective Chow, working in conjunction with the department's cold case unit, began the painstaking process of combing through Harold's past, looking for any signs of previous victims. As the investigation expanded, so did the media coverage. What had started as a local tragedy soon caught the attention of national news outlets. The story touched on so many hot-button issues: police use of force, child sexual abuse, the trust placed in family members, that it became a lightning rod for debate and discussion across the country. Angela found herself at the center of a storm she never could have anticipated. Her phone rang constantly with requests for interviews, which she steadfastly refused. Reporters camped out on her lawn, hoping to catch a glimpse of the family at the heart of the sensational story. Through it all, Angela clung to one certainty: she had done what was necessary to protect her child. As painful and complicated as the aftermath was, she couldn't bring herself to regret her actions that day. One afternoon, as Angela sat on her front porch, ignoring the occasional flash of a camera from across the street, she was surprised by a visit from her partner, Officer Darnell Jackson. Darnell had been supportive from the beginning, one of the few people who didn't look at Angela differently after the shooting. "How are you holding up, partner?" Darnell asked, settling into the chair next to her. Angela managed a weak smile. "About as well as can be expected, I guess. Some days are harder than others." Darnell nodded, his expression serious. "Listen, Sam, I wanted you to hear this from me before it hits the news. We got a call yesterday, a woman claiming she was abused by your father back in the 80s. She saw the story on the news and decided to come forward." Angela felt the world tilt beneath her. She gripped the arms of her chair, trying to steady herself. "Oh God," she whispered. "It's true then. There were others." Darnell reached out, placing a comforting hand on her arm. "We don't know the full story yet. Chow's looking into it, but I thought you should know. This might change things, Sam. It could support your claim that you believed he posed an ongoing threat." As Darnell's words sank in, Angela felt a strange mix of horror and vindication. The knowledge that her father had likely been abusing children for decades was sickening, but it also reinforced her conviction that she had done the right thing in stopping him, no matter the personal cost. "Thank you for telling me," Angela said, her voice hoarse. I need to talk to Michael and Jasmine. They should hear this from me." As Darnell left, promising to keep her updated, Angela stood on her porch, looking out at the neighborhood she had sworn to protect. The world seemed different now, shadowed by the knowledge of long-hidden crimes and the weight of secrets finally brought to light. But as she turned to go back inside to face her family with this new and painful information, Angela felt a flicker of something she hadn't experienced in weeks. Hope. Hope that the truth would come out, that justice would be served, and that somehow they would find a way to heal from this trauma. The road ahead was long and uncertain, but Angela Reid was ready to walk it, one step at a time. Grace Watkins met them at the courthouse steps, her professional demeanor a steadying presence amidst the chaos of reporters shouting questions and cameras flashing. "Remember," Watkins said quietly as they made their way inside, "the grand jury process is secret. You'll be testifying alone without me present. Just tell the truth, Angela. That's all you can do." Angela nodded, squeezing Michael's hand one last time before following a court officer down a long hallway. As the doors to the grand jury room opened, she took a deep breath, steeling herself for what was to come. The room was smaller than she had imagined, with 23 jurors seated in rows facing a single chair where she would give her testimony. Assistant District Attorney Robert Chow was there, along with a court reporter and the foreperson of the grand jury. The atmosphere was tense, the weight of their task palpable in the air. As Angela was sworn in, she looked at the faces of the jurors. They were a diverse group, men and women of various ages and backgrounds. Some looked at her with sympathy, others with curiosity, and a few with what seemed like judgment. She reminded herself that their job was not to determine her guilt or innocence, but simply to decide if there was enough evidence to bring the case to trial. Ada Chow began his questioning gently, asking Angela to recount the events leading up to the shooting. As she spoke, describing the moment she walked in on her father and Jasmine, Angela felt a surge of the same rage and horror she had experienced that day. Her voice shook, but she pushed on, determined to make the jurors understand. "In that moment," she said, her eyes fixed on a point just above the jurors' heads, "I wasn't thinking as a police officer. I was a mother seeing her child in danger. Everything I've ever learned about protecting the innocent, about stopping predators, it all came down to that one moment." Chow nodded, his expression neutral. "Officer Reid, did you consider any other options before discharging your weapon? Calling for backup, perhaps? Or attempting to physically restrain your father?" Angela closed her eyes briefly, remembering the split-second decision she had made. "Honestly, sir, no. At that moment, all I could think about was stopping him, making sure he could never hurt Jasmine or anyone else ever again. I know now that there might have been other options, but in that instant, I truly believed I was doing the only thing I could to protect my daughter." The questions continued for hours, delving into Angela's relationship with her father, her training as a police officer, and her state of mind in the aftermath of the shooting. Chow pressed her on the use of deadly force against an unarmed man, on why she had fired 5 times instead of once or twice. Through it all, Angela remained composed, answering each question as honestly as she could. When Chow brought up the other victims who had come forward, Angela felt a fresh wave of guilt and anger wash over her. "If I had known," she said, her voice breaking slightly, "if I had had any idea what he was capable of, I would have stopped him long ago. The thought that he might have hurt other children, it haunts me every day." As the questioning wound down, Angela felt drained, but oddly relieved. She had told her story, laid bare the terrible choices she had faced. Now it was up to the grand jury to decide what would happen next. The days following her testimony were a blur of anxiety and waiting. Angela threw herself into caring for Jasmine, whose therapy was progressing slowly but steadily. They spent long hours together, rebuilding the trust that had been shattered by Harold's betrayal. It was a week later when Grace Watkins called with news. Angela and Michael huddled around the phone in their kit chow, hearts pounding as they waited to hear their fate. "The grand jury has made their decision," Watkins said, her voice carefully neutral. "They've decided not to indict Angela. There won't be criminal charges." The relief that flooded through Angela was so intense, she felt her knees buckle. Michael caught her, holding her close as they both processed the news. "It's over," Angela whispered, tears streaming down her face. "It's really over." But even as she said the words, Angela knew it wasn't entirely true. The legal battle might be over, but the emotional scars left by her father's actions and her own response would take much longer to heal. This story leaves a heavy imprint on the soul, and with it comes some of the hardest, most painful lessons anyone could ever learn. What happened to Officer Angela Reid and her family isn't just a tragedy, it's a wake-up call. It's a piercing reminder that danger doesn't always wear a stranger's face. Sometimes it looks like the people we love and trust the most. One of the biggest lessons here is that evil can hide in plain sight, even under the roof you thought was safest. Angela trusted her father. He was helpful, kind, a doting grandfather. And yet, behind that familiar smile was a darkness no one suspected. We often teach our kids to be careful around strangers, but the truth is, most predators aren't strangers. They're people already inside our lives. So if there's one thing to take away, it's that trust must be earned continuously, even from family. And parents, guardians, please don't ignore your instincts. If something feels off, don't brush it away. A chill down your spine might just be the warning sign you weren't meant to ignore. Another crucial truth this story teaches is the terrifying strength of silence. Jasmine didn't tell her mother what was happening, And not because she didn't trust her, because victims, especially children, are often scared, confused, or made to feel like they're somehow to blame. So creating an environment where your kids know without a doubt they can talk to you about anything without fear of punishment, shame, or disbelief is vital. Angela found out the hard way. Most parents don't get that chance before it's too late. And then there's the emotional toll, the fallout. Even though Angela acted to protect her daughter, she wasn't left feeling like a hero. She felt broken. Guilt, grief, shame, isolation, it consumed her. This shows us that doing the right thing doesn't always feel good. Sometimes it feels like it's tearing your life apart, but that doesn't make it any less right. The story also reminds us how society and even law enforcement systems aren't fully equipped to handle the gray areas of justice. Angela was both a protector and a killer, a mother and a cop. Her story forces us to ask hard questions. When is violence justified? Can someone be both a victim and an executioner? These questions don't have easy answers, but they matter. Lastly, it speaks to the importance of therapy and healing. Jasmine, Michael, Angela, they were all walking through different stages of trauma. And without professional help, that kind of pain can hollow a family out from the inside. The road to healing isn't quick or clean, but it's possible. With love, support, and time, survivors can find their way back from even the darkest places. So if you're watching this and something about this story hits too close to home, don't suffer in silence. Whether you're a parent, a survivor, or someone living with guilt over what you missed, know this: help is out there. Healing is possible, and speaking up might be the bravest, most powerful step you ever take. You are not alone, and you don't have to carry this alone either. What would you have done in Angela's place? Could you pull the trigger if it meant protecting your child? Do you think Angela should face charges, or was she justified in what she did? Let us know in the comments.